From the heart of our nation's capital, here's Family Research Council President Tony Perkins.
Well, thanks for tuning in for this Friday edition of Washington Watch. Coming up, Congress has left for the week, but when they return next week, one of the measures waiting for action is the annual National Defense Authorization Act, which, in its amended form, could be in serious trouble.
At a time of huge trouble for global security, doing the Defense Authorization Bill is more important than ever. The annual defense bill is a prime example of both sides cooperating on a strong bipartisan package to strengthen America's national security, to take care of our service members, keep the United States the leader in innovation.
That was Senate Scare Leader Chuck Schumer yesterday after the conference committee language on the NDAA was released, which, by the way, stripped out about 95% of the House-approved pro-family language. We're going to break the bill down with Missouri Congressman Eric Burlison in just a moment. Also, after Senate Republicans rejected the Democrats' $105 billion additional funding for Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel, the stalled talks over border security have been given new life.
And here's what he needs to understand. If you don't use your executive tools or work with us for a statutory solution, none of us who are supportive of Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan can vote on a supplemental, because you're making us pick countries abroad over our own homeland security.
That was South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham yesterday telling President Biden that unless he agrees to border protections, there will be no supplemental bill. The United Nations Security Council met in an emergency meeting today in New York after the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres evoked a rarely used Article 99 in an effort to stop Israel from defending itself from the Hamas terrorist organization.
The people of Gaza are looking into the abyss. The international community must do everything possible to end their ordeal. I urge the Council to spare no effort to push for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, for the protection of civilians, and for the urgent delivery of life-saving aid.
That was the UN Secretary General today at the special meeting of the Security Council. Within the last hour, the United States Representative, Ambassador Robert Woods, exercised the U.S.'s veto power, effectively killing the ceasefire resolution put forward by Guterres. What is Article 99, and why should we ignore the UN Secretary? We're going to talk about that. Suzanne Bowdy, editorial director and senior writer for The Washington Stand, joins me later on this Friday edition. And finally, on this Friday edition, I have a very special guest who's going to join me in studio. But you're going to have to stick around to find out who it is. The website, TonyPerkins.com, lots of information there for you. Be sure and check it out. Our word for today comes from John chapter 19. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother, and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing by, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. Notice that Jesus, taking care of the spiritual needs of mankind, paused to provide for the physical needs of his mother. You see, our responsibilities in the home are never superseded by those on the outside. Whether it's business, education, entertainment, or even ministry itself, we must never forget nor neglect our family responsibilities. To find out more about FRC's journey through the Bible, go to frc.org/Bible. You can also join me every morning on Facebook or at TonyPerkins.com for a morning devotion based upon our daily Bible reading plan. Congress released its latest version of the $886 billion National Defense Authorization this week. It was the Conference Committee report that came back from both the House and Senate conferees. But among the many problems with the bill, it does not include the Jackson-Roy Amendment to block the Pentagon's illegal abortion funding policy. The proposed language of the NDAA has also drawn fire for extending the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, into the spring. But I'll note that the current version of NDAA does contain some, and I emphasize some, conservative provisions that were put in by the House regarding the military's DEI policies. And despite its failure to block the taxpayer funding of abortion, there are still some Republicans supporting the bill, but its future is questionable. Join me now to discuss this and more, Congressman Eric Burlison. He serves on the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, the House Transportation Committee, the Infrastructure Committee, and the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. He represents the 7th Congressional District of Missouri. Congressman Burlison, welcome back to the program.
Good to see you, Tony.
So let me just get your thoughts on the current version of the NDA, the conference committee report that came back stripping out about 90% of the conservative provisions put in back in July.
Yeah, I'm extremely disappointed. I keep hearing that we're gonna fight, but every time we get to the time in which it's time to fight, we keep kicking the can down the road. It's extremely, extremely disappointing to see all of, the vast majority of our, what I would think is common sense provisions, certainly conservative provisions that we put in place really to stop this Biden administration from doing some of this crazy woke and liberal efforts. And in the case of the abortion transportation, very dangerous, in my opinion. I think that as a believer, the fact that we are going to, if we vote for this bill in its current form, your vote is a vote of affirmation over the Biden's policies that you're not going to try to remove in this bill. And I cannot, in good conscience, vote unless we are able to strip out the money that's being used to fund abortion travel.
Congressman, the media is saying, well, the Republicans are trying to interject their social policies into the Department of Defense, into the NDAA. But all of these policies, which the Republicans were addressing in their version of the NDAA, which passed, I believe, back in July, went over to the Senate, and the Senate's now, they've passed their version, and this is the conference committee, which essentially, as I mentioned, dropped about 95% of the Republican or the House conservative language. Everything the House did was simply addressing what the Biden administration did on its own. This wasn't something that Congress did a couple of years ago, and you're just now correcting it. If I'm not mistaken, this is all being driven by the Biden administration.
Absolutely, Tony. These are all, the criticism that we're trying to politicize this is actually the opposite, because we're trying to remove a lot of these politicalizations and what I consider a misuse of the Department of Defense. So whenever they're using taxpayer dollars to fund drag queen story hours on our military bases, or creating, diversity, equity, inclusion offices and hiring people that are specific to those roles. That's one thing. But what I cannot tolerate is that we're going to continue the process of paying for the travel expenses of people who want to get an abortion. Look, for a long time, for like 40 years, there was an agreement between Republicans and Democrats that the government would not use taxpayer dollars to fund abortions. And Joe Biden has thrown that concept out of the window. And to me, he's the one that made this a political process.
Congressman Burlison, I agree with you 100%, because I think this is precedent setting, because as you stated, this has been the policy for decades, that we would not force taxpayers into a position of having facilitate or fund abortion in any form or fashion. That's been common ground. But unilaterally, the Biden administration pushing this. Now, let me point out, as I understand, that's still in this conference committee report is language regarding the DEI programs, putting some caps on the spending there, not really changing it much, but just kind of looks like it's just kind of corralling it, restraining it.
Yeah, putting caps on it.
Right. But does nothing.
Not eliminating it.
Nothing to this, what I call moral issue of abortion, which is, to me, probably the most important aspect of the NDAA. I'm all for the military. I'm a veteran. I'm all for the military. But we should not allow it to be politicized in advancing this pro-abortion agenda. But, Congressman, let me ask you something else, because what's drawn a lot of concern and opposition that I'm hearing is the inclusion in this bill of the FISA provisions, which would allow the federal government to continue its surveillance, yes, of foreign actors. But there's been a lot of concern over how the Biden Department of Justice and the intelligence community has been operating.
Yeah, there are a lot of concerns. There have been over 200,000 times that this system has been abused, particularly by the FBI. And what that means is, for the American people, for your listeners, is that there's a good chance that you or your neighbor have had their emails or text threads or other communications read because it was lumped in with other foreign nationals inadvertently. And that should never be the case. We should require a warrant, as is protected under the Fourth Amendment. But we have really, with this FISA, we have thrown that out the window. So I think to vote for a clean FISA reauthorization is really awful to the rights of the American people. And so whenever they push back on me, when the press, even Fox News push back on me saying, but aren't you worried that if we don't reauthorize FISA, that there's going to be an attack and then the blood will be on your hands? And, Tony, my response is that American patriots have already shed blood for the rights that you and I hold today. First Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment rights. These are so sacred that people sacrifice their lives to defend, their families and their posterity. And for us to ignore that and throw those rights out the window, we are doing a disservice to all of the men and women who have sacrificed for those rights.
I agree. I think there's a path forward to where we can do both. But this, a clean, as you pointed out, a clean reauthorization does not do that, because we've seen the abuses of this administration. And any tool we give them should be heavily monitored, and Congress should have oversight, which they've not had of FISA.
That's right. And Tony, part of this is that we're in the situation where we only control the House. We don't have the Senate. We don't have the White House. So we can either go down two paths. We can get bold and stare down some of these deadlines and go past some of these deadlines to pressure and the Senate and the White House to take the Republican measures, to take some of these reforms to FISA, to take the abortion language reform in the NDAA. But because if we're not willing to do that, if we're not willing to go beyond the brink, then the other side knows that ultimately they've won.
Yeah.
If we are not willing to let FISA expire, we're going to have to take whatever the Senate wants. And that's what's so disappointing to me. I would like to see a lot more courage come out of the House, and particularly out of House leadership, to be able to say, look, if we're abortion and funding for taxpayer funding for abortion is so important that if it's not included, we're going to have to let the NDAA expire.
And we may very well see that this coming week. Congressman Burleson, I want to thank you for joining us, and have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you. You too. Merry Christmas.
All right, folks, stick with us. We're back to break this down further after the break.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us on this Friday. I know normally Jody Heiss is sitting in for me, but I let him have the afternoon off. I'm such a nice boss. Well, as we come to the end of this year, I want to invite you to join with the Family Research Council and Washington Watch as we prepare for 2024. It's going to be a big year. It's going to be a lot going on. And we've got some folks that have put forward a matching challenge so that whatever you give between now and December 31st will be matched. It'll be doubled. So if you give a gift today, well, if you give $20, it becomes $40. $50 becomes $100. $100,000 becomes $200,000. So get your checkbook out. But seriously, we've got folks standing by from our team are standing by to take your call. So give us a call. Don't let it be lonely. Call them 800-225-4008. That's 800-225-4008. All right, we're going to continue the discussion on the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. It's a busy time here in Washington, D.C., with the possible advancement of presidential impeachment proceedings or inquiry next week. But with the few legislative days remaining, which is basically next week, the NDAA remains the largest annual bill on Congress's plate leading up to the Christmas recess. But the question is, will House Republicans pass this really gutted version of the NDAA that includes the left's priorities of taxpayer funding of abortion, trans surgeries? Joining me now to discuss this is Suzanne Bowdy, editorial director and senior writer at the Washington Stand, who published a commentary this morning on the NDAA abortion battle. Suzanne, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks, Tony. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. By the way, before we get started, tell folks about how they can find out what's happening at the Stand.
Yeah, we publish news from a biblical worldview. You can find us at thewashingtonstand.com. We have commentary, we have news. We're touching on all the things happening on the Hill. We're touching also on the guests that you have on radio show, just breaking news.
So if people want the written version of Washington
That's right.
Watch, they can often get, when I do a good job, they can get, they can read about it. So let's talk about the NDAA battle that is really being teed up for next week. This comes this week, Coach Tuberville ended his 10-month hold on military promotions, which really brought attention to this illegal abortion travel policy. Now, some of those defending this are saying, well, the Pentagon's reporting that only 12 women took advantage of this. So we're only talking about 12 abortions. So what's the big deal?
It's 12 lives. Would we say that if there were a shooting and 12 children were dead? These are individual precious human lives. It doesn't matter the number of lives that are lost. It's the principle of the thing. And in fact, they're saying 12 people have taken advantage of this policy, but the Biden administration actually admitted to the Heritage Foundation that this could escalate. It may be 12 women now. It could be 4,000 women in years to come. So we're not just talking about 12 quote-unquote lives.
Well, isn't that the case when prior to the Hyde Amendment, when the federal government was funding abortion? What happens when the government funds something?
Whenever the government subsidizes something, it expands. We saw that, I was here back in the Obamacare debates. We tracked what would happen if taxpayer-funded abortion was included in healthcare. And what you saw was a massive increase, as much as 40%, when we're not acting under the Hyde Amendment, which doesn't allow taxpayer funding to go for abortion. And it certainly shouldn't here. The Biden administration acted unilaterally. I heard you talking to the congressman before, and you asked, what kind of precedent would this set? And the precedent that it would set is that you don't need Congress to legislate. Right. You can just make up your own rules as you go. There's an executive branch and a legislative branch for a reason, and Biden has overstepped his boundaries.
A very good point. There are really two issues here. One is, the issue of, it's just 12, and you're absolutely right, it will grow. Mm-hmm. But if someone commits one murder, they're a murderer.
Right.
If they commit mass murder, they're a murderer. The moral situation is still the same.
Exactly.
It is the taking of unborn life. So whether it's one life, 12 lives, 12,000 lives, 12 million lives, the principle is there. It matters. Right. So it sets a precedent, number one, that for 4 decades we've had this agreement that taxpayers are not going to be entangled
Forced.
in this funding scheme for abortion. So that's number one. But your second point needs a lot of attention, because if Congress allows an administration to unilaterally ignore the law, what's next?
Well, they're making themselves irrelevant, which I think is interesting. I don't understand why the Senate is not lining up to say, this is our job, this isn't your job.
I'm not so sure that that's really the mindset of many in Congress. For years they allowed the courts to do a lot of this stuff, and they would say, "Oh, the court is taken away," but in the behind the scenes they were clapping about it because they didn't have to make difficult votes.
Didn't want to get their hands dirty.
Just like on the issue of abortion, the courts took it out of the hands of lawmakers for years, but now it's back into their hands. They don't want to deal with it. And this is a prime example, because they're allowing the Biden administration to unilaterally make the decisions, and they don't want to vote on it.
And yet they'll go to the mat on the border. They'll go to the mat on funding for Ukraine. But this is a bright red line, as you've called it, that if once we cross it, we can't go back.
Right.
What about taxpayer-funded abortion in healthcare, as you've said, or everywhere? I mean,
once
you just can't return.
Once you give evil an inch, it will take a mile.
And we saw this with the Obamacare debate. I mean, this isn't the first time that Democrats have tried to bring taxpayer-funded abortion into legislative policy. The difference now is they're not trying to do it legislatively. They're bypassing Congress, and that's where the American people really need to get involved and say, this is not about 12 lives. This is not even about the NDAA. This is about our system of government, and it's about the way we need to work moving forward.
They're going to push Republicans to the wall and say, this is about national security. That's what the FISA is being interjected into this. If you don't do this, America's going to be attacked. But these are principles that this nation has been standing upon, the rule of law, for nearly 240 years. And so to allow them to be attacked by the left, the damage would be irreparable.
Right. And Speaker Johnson, is in a tight spot. He's got a very narrow majority. So the more people weigh in, even if you think your congressman isn't paying attention to them, you need to make them pay attention to this issue. Yeah,
folks, we're up against a break, but let me give you that Capitol switchboard number where you can call your member of Congress. It's 202-224-3121, or you go to TonyPerkins.com and we can connect you by email. But you need to weigh in and say, look, if you're not going to protect, if the NDAA language is not going to protect life and get me out of the abortion business, don't vote for it. This is, as Suzanne said, a red line. This is a red line. All right, we're going to continue this conversation. Also going to take a look at the Ukraine funding, the supplemental $105 billion. Those discussions back on track now as Republicans in the Senate held firm and stopped it in its tracks over border security issues. Also going to touch on the United Nations and their attempt to basically call for a ceasefire. That's next. Don't go away.
All of us are born with the desire to find truth and meaning. Where did I come from? What happens when I die? While our answers to these questions may divide us, we are united in our need for the freedom to answer life's biggest questions and make life's biggest decisions for ourselves. That's why religious freedom matters for everyone. Religious freedom matters because the powerful have long wanted to control those who are less powerful. Religious freedom matters because the freedom of those who are different is often threatened by those who believe different is dangerous. Leah Sheribu, a Christian teenager in Nigeria, remains a captive of Boko Haram for her refusal to renounce her Christian faith. Chinese pastor Wang Yi is serving a 9-year sentence for speaking publicly against the Chinese government. All of this because people in power decided different is dangerous. At the Center for Religious Liberty at Family Research Council, we promote religious freedom for everyone because the only alternative is religious freedom for no one. We encourage Americans and the American government to engage and advocate for the persecuted, and they do. We work every day to bring good news to the afflicted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. We do it because that's what Jesus does. We work to give freedom to others because we ourselves have been set free.
This is Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins. Good to have you with us on this Friday edition of Washington Watch. I'm continuing my conversation with Suzanne Bowdy, editorial director and senior writer at the Washington Stand. Suzanne, thanks for sticking around.
I have no choice.
I know, I'm the boss.
You're my boss.
Yeah, I guess. I wonder how that worked. So I was reading some articles today criticizing the Republicans because they've really got nothing done. And they haven't passed a lot of stuff. They've got the funding gun. The government didn't shut down. They've got the NDA teed up. And, you know, they were saying, well, this is a do-nothing Congress.
Yeah, well, they call the Senate the most deliberative body in the world. And in this case, we don't want them to deliberate anymore. If they're going to pass an NDAA that funds taxpayer-funded abortion and DEI, drag shows, we're also talking about taxpayer-funded gender transition surgeries in the military.
That was actually taken out of the House.
That's not gotten any attention, but that's actually a way bigger expense and also just a heinous thing that we would be pulling men and women who are having trouble recruiting out of the line of duty, paying for their surgeries, then they're undeployable. That's also been stripped out of the NDAA.
Well, actually, I think in many cases that's being used to recruit people who are...
Come get free surgery.
Right, exactly. But I actually think that a do-nothing Congress is good because I can't recall when Congress did anything good for the American people. As long as they keep us safe and take care of the basics, I don't want Congress doing things. I think gridlock is good because it provides some stability. I mean, you think about it, we talked about this with Congressman Burleson. The Republicans have a 3-seat margin. It's soon to be down to 1.
Right.
So you've got one chamber out of the legislative branch. Then you've got to deal with the executive branch controlled by Biden. So the Republicans have very little that they could do. They certainly can't advance anything in this environment. So if they can kill stuff, all the better.
Right. And I'm very interested. You're on the Hill a lot, so I'm going to turn the tables on you. But what are you hearing? Is there a possibility for a grand bargain where we're talking about the NDAA before the end of the week, Ukraine aid bundled with Israel, and also so many things? Do you think they can get that done? What are you hearing?
Well, I do think that the supplemental funding for Ukraine with border security issues has the highest probability of passing.
Because the Republicans are united.
They're united on the border. The American public has elevated that issue to probably the #1 national security issue.
With bipartisan support.
Right, with bipartisan support. And in the rare occurrence of the Senate Republicans this week voting against the $105 billion supplemental, that makes it very clear to Chuck Schumer, the scare leader in the Senate, that there's no path forward without it. And so even today, President Biden signaling that he's willing to make some negotiations. Now, the good news, and we've talked about this on the program with members of the Senate, is that they're smarter than just to accept more government funding for border security and window dressing. They want numbers.
Right.
They want to show a reduction since we this week set another record with illegal crossings. Yeah. I want to talk about the United Nations, and today, in fact, this was a little surprising. Robert Woods, the ambassador to the United Nations, in the Security Council, an emergency meeting called by Guterres, the Secretary General, using Article 99, which hasn't been used since 1971, used it to try to force a ceasefire on Israel. That effort failed this afternoon, about an hour and a half ago.
Right, and it failed because the United States vetoed it, and the United States was the only country to veto it, which is shocking, I believe, when you consider all that's gone on in Israel, the videos that have been released, the atrocities that we know that have been committed there. It's shocking to me, but I am grateful that the United States found its spine and did decide to say, hey, this isn't a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. What happened on October 7th was the humanitarian crisis against innocent civilians.
You know, I don't want to see anybody, I don't want to see any loss of life, but I've been there many times, and if the Israelis are not allowed to secure their own country, America is going to pay a price for that. And we need to ignore the United Nations and this Secretary General, Guterres. The United States should not give a penny to this moron who is running the place. I want to play this clip from October 24th that he had and just show you kind of his orientation. Clip 10, please.
The attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. They have seen their land steadily devoured by settlements and plagued by violence, their economy stifled, their people displaced, and their homes demolished. Their hopes for a political solution to their plight have been vanishing.
I mean, the only vacuum is, between his ears when it comes to understanding what's happening here. And this is, the United Nations has become not just, I'm trying to be careful what I say here. They're no longer just a distraction.
No.
They are advocating for the enemies of freedom.
Right. They've become a satellite office of Hamas. And you have to wonder what is happening at the UN. What do you think their agenda is in this? What do you think his end game is?
It is certainly not to stand with Israel or freedom. It is to advance the Marxist ideology and the agenda of radical Islamists. So we're out of time on this conversation, but look, the United States should get out of the United Nations. We should not be funding them at all. Trump had us moving in the right direction, Biden in the wrong. Suzanne Bowdy, thanks so much for joining us. I hope you have something to write about now.
I sure do. Thanks, Tony.
All right, folks, on the other side of the break, still more Washington Watch to come. Let me encourage you to check out the website, TonyPerkins.com, find out resources and how you can get on the mailing list of the Washington Stand. A special guest right here next on Washington Watch. Tune in to find out who. Don't go away. We're back right after this.
The world is hurting, streets are filled with crime, families are broken, sin is celebrated, and God is mocked. Everywhere we look, the wages of our sin are on full display. As Christians, we know that surrender to God's will is the solution to our biggest problems, but not everyone agrees. Even in church, we hear people say the most important thing is to be tolerant, that we shouldn't impose our morality on other people, and that loving our neighbor means celebrating what they do. But you can't do that. It's not that you don't love your neighbor, you do, but you care about God's opinion more than your neighbor's opinion, and this makes you different. In fact, sometimes it makes you feel alone, like you're the only one. But there is good news. You are not alone, not even close. Research has found that there are 59 million American adults who are a lot like you. There are millions of people around the country who are born again, deeply committed to practicing their faith, and believe the Bible is the reliable Word of God. But that's not all. They're also engaged in our government. They're voters. They're more likely to be involved in their community, and they're making a difference in elections. The problem is that a lot of them feel alone too. We want to change that. FRC wants to connect these 59 million Americans to speak the truth together, no matter the cost. If you want to learn more about this group and what it means to be a spiritually active, governance-engaged conservative, or if you want to find out if you are one of these SageCons yourself, go to frc.org/SageCon and take the quiz to find out. The world is hurting, and we have the solution. We can't do it alone, but we can do it if we work together. That's what we're working toward every day. Join us. Go to frc.org/SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more. That's SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more.
I'm often asked by people, Tony, how do you stay encouraged? How do you deal with all of the stuff in Washington, D.C., the negative policies that are attacking our faith, our family, and our freedoms? Well, you want me to let you in on the secret? It's called the Word of God. And that is why the Family Research Council embarked on Stand on the Word, a 2-year journey through the Bible. It's a chronological Bible reading plan with just 10 to 15 minutes a day. In 2 years, you will have covered the entire Bible. And to go along with this, Monday through Friday, I do a morning devotional that goes along with the reading of the day. It's all designed to encourage you on this journey because the Word of God, as the psalmist said, in my affliction, here's my comfort. Your Word gives me life. That is our source of strength. To find out more, go to TonyPerkins.com or frc.org/Bible. And I invite you to join me every morning for our Stand on the Word Bible devotion.
It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas.
Yes, it is. Merry Christmas. Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us on this Friday afternoon. The website, TonyPerkins.com. And by the way, folks, we, as I mentioned earlier, we do have team members standing by to take your call. If you'd like to partner with us, Washington Watch is a product of the Family Research Council. We do not get any. We do not receive any federal funds. We are here simply because folks like you across this nation who are generous in your support. And so if you'd like to partner with us as we come to the end of the year, it's an important time of year for nonprofit organizations. I have team members standing by to take your call at 800-225-4008. That's 800-225-4008. And because of a challenge match that some of our very generous donors have put forward, whatever you give between now and December 31st will be matched. It'll be doubled. So call us, 800-225-4008. Let me tie up some loose ends here before I bring in my special guest here in this final segment of Friday's program. So we were talking about the National Defense Authorization Act, which is going to be teed up this next week. The conference language, as we talked about, is problematic. It does not include the pro-life, pro-family, pro-common sense language, returning the military to what it was before. So this is nothing new. It's not like the conservatives are adding new conservative elements. They're simply returning it to what it was before the Biden administration. And it wasn't Congress that changed it. It was the Biden administration unilaterally doing it, rejecting 40 years of bipartisan agreement that taxpayers would not be involved in abortion. No longer the case in the Department of Defense under this administration. So give your member of Congress a call, and you can call them 202-224-3121. That's 202-224-3121 is the Capitol switchboard number. They'll connect you with the office and just tell them, look, until we are out of the abortion business and we're abiding by the law, do not vote for the National Defense Authorization Act. So take that action today. All right, the Christmas season provides us a wonderful reminder each year that God loves us so much. He loves us so much that he sent his son to save mankind. And let me personalize that, not just mankind, but you and me, so that we might have eternal life in him. And not just eternal life, but abundant life. And the season allows us a moment in our busy lives to pause, to spend time with family and friends, to instruct our children on the beauty of Christmas, the beautiful story, and to establish family traditions to reinforce these learnings. It's really a time to build family and community in the home. And I'm pleased to welcome a very special guest to discuss this, my wife and the steward of many Perkins family traditions, Lawana Perkins. Welcome, Lawana Perkins, to Washington Watch.
Thank you.
Well, let's talk about this. We have been married now going on almost 39 years, right?
38.
Well, is it going on 38?
30, going on 38.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, I'm close. All right. So let's talk about some of those traditions that have really become, now that, we're not just parents of 5, but we're now grandparents. How important is it, as you look back, the Christmas season and establishing these family traditions that really become anchors?
One of the things that we've always tried to do is to make sure that we keep Christ the center of Christmas, because after all, that's what Christmas is. It's the celebration of his birth. And but there are some fun things that we do as a family. For probably 25, maybe 30 years, we've been making pralines. And
I think it's 35 years.
Okay, 35 years. You used to make them to begin with.
I used to make them, but I've trained up a generation to make them now.
And so I started making them, and as the kids got older, they've been able to make them. In fact, 2 are at home right now making pralines. But those are just those are fun times that we get together, and we're excited about doing things together, cooking together. Whether it's one is making the pralines, the other's packaging them, but they are fun, and the kids remember them.
But let me step back. It's not just Christmas in which we focus on building family traditions. Right. So these things are important all year long. It's not just one time a year, but there's special things that we do that are a part of the Christmas season. Another one that we tend to do is we watch Christmas Christmas movies. A lot of people do that, but that has become kind of a tradition, and some aren't so happy about some of the movies we watch because we know all the lines by memory, but it's still a tradition.
One of our daughters said, and I won't say who it is, but she said, "Mom, be sure and tell them that we watch the same movies every year, A Muppet Christmas Carol and It's a Wonderful Life. We laugh at the same lines every year like we've never seen them before." But they enjoy them. And I will also say, after watching those movies for 30 years, especially our older adult children, they'll say, well, maybe let's not watch that one this year. And so it's okay to change and watch new movies, but, those are fun movies. Our kids remember the lines. In fact, there's one, for some reason, there's a part in one of the movies that if you watch it online, they've cut out one of the songs. And we always made fun of the song. But now when the song is not there, the kids are going, what did they do with this song? So
what those do is just like anything else. It's a common currency. It's something we have in common that you build around. And so these things actually, these lines from these movies pop up throughout the year, not just at Christmas time. But let's talk about, Lawana, how parents and grandparents need to, but can keep Jesus at the center of the family and of the celebration. You know, what are some of the things that can be done there because it's great to have celebrations, it's great to have traditions, but they need to be rooted in deep meaning and what being a homeschool family, we look at everything as an educational opportunity.
Right.
And so we never miss an opportunity to take these events, these conversations, and take them to a deeper place of meaning.
Right. You know, the first thing, I mean, one thing that I do every Christmas season is I just pray, Lord, help us to keep our focus on Jesus, not on the decorating, and all of those, the gift giving. While all of those things are fun and can be fun, we sometimes tend to lose our focus. So first thing, we pray through the season that you, not only you, but you impart that to your children. When the kids were little, there was a book called The Jesus Tree, and it was about how to incorporate Jesus in every ornament that you put on the tree. And the kids loved that, and they still remember that. We don't read it anymore because it's for younger children. But it was a good way and a good reminder as we decorated the tree. This is about Jesus, not about Santa Claus or reindeer or anything like that. But it was a good reminder for us.
So speak to a moment to young parents about, especially wives, mothers, who often have a lot of things going on this time of year. How do you keep this time of year from becoming a time of stress and anxiety and celebrating it and not carrying a tremendous weight of anxiety because of family, relations, all these different aspects that are pulling at you?
I'm still trying to figure some of that out. I would say pre-planning is great. In so many times, I tend to be reactionary instead of planning and preparing. I tend to react, and so the more you can pre-plan activities or even gift giving, if you can do that in advance, it just helps with the stress level. And I would say when it comes to family traditions, we have a lot of different traditions, a lot of different things that we do every year, but you don't have to do everything. Just choose one thing. And it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be some grand thing. It can be just a simple, get a box of graham crackers and some icing and maybe some little candies and build a little gingerbread house.
Or make an evening out of decorating the tree. That's something that we have. We have a star, and I think I've talked about this before. We have a star that sits on top of our tree that came from my father's family. That was from the Depression era, and so it's not elaborate, but it sits upon our tree. Now, I would pick the kids up to put it up there on top of the tree. It's almost they can pick me up now collectively, but. Those are, I mean, they're not big things, but they're memory-making things.
And about decorating the tree, as throughout the years, some have been excited about decorating, and then some years they just don't seem as excited. So year before last, or last year actually, I just decorated it by myself. I didn't ask anyone. One of my adult children this year said, "Mom, please don't decorate until I get off of work." But that was so important, and I didn't realize just how important that was, but just doing that as a family is important.
I'm going to go back to the stress, anxiety, because we live in a very polarized society, and families get together at Christmas. And sometimes families have differences of opinions. They have different political backgrounds, and there's so many issues that divide us. How should we look at these situations, not dreadfully as we're going to have these conversations or we're going to be in these difficult situations, but look at them as opportunities to share the love of Christ?
Well, again, I think that goes back to prayer. You pray before you go. And just because someone has a different opinion than you do on whatever doesn't mean that you have to share your opinion on everything. We don't always have to say, well, I want to let you know what I think. But just to love on people and let them know that you love them, and try to find something common that you can talk about. And especially, let them know that Jesus is the reason that we're celebrating.
I think if we go into it with a mindset of this is an opportunity to, maybe we get a chance to talk about it, and we'll look for those opportunities, but certainly show the love of Christ.
Right.
And I think oftentimes the gift of our time, of just spending time with family and friends, is a demonstration of that.
Sure.
And it is, I think it's a wonderful time to do just that, because it is Christmas, and it's an opportunity to talk about the reason for Christmas, to talk about Jesus, and have those conversations around the table that will, I quite frankly, I don't think that divides. I think that invites people in. I don't particularly care to talk about the politics. Everybody wants to know what's happening politically. That's the last thing I want to talk about at Christmas. But we can have those talks about things that are significant, and it's such an appropriate time. And it goes back to what you said. I believe if we approach this entire season with prayer, Lord, give me those opportunities and the words to say to share the love of Jesus. And the reason that we celebrate this, because it's been pushed out so much from the broader culture. It's just become, for some, it's just become a time to give gifts, get time off from work, and celebrate. But there is a true meaning for this, and we should be intentional about teaching that to our children, living it out, sharing it, expressing it. It's a great opportunity, I believe, for evangelism.
Right.
So, what's on your to-do list now for Christmas? What are you looking forward to? Other than going and getting my Christmas present.
I've already ordered your Christmas present.
Oh, okay. All right, so I guess we're going to...
I have a few gifts left to buy.
All right, so we're going to go home, make some pralines. Yes. And then what movie are we watching this weekend? We haven't watched It's a Wonderful Life, so...
Probably A Muppet's Christmas Carol.
Muppet's Christmas.
We have to watch that one.
Yeah. It is one of my favorites. It is one of my favorites. I won't tell you what my favorite lines are, though. Luana Perkins, thanks so much for joining us on this Friday edition of Washington Watch.
Thank you for having me.
It's not often I get to say, I love you, to my guest. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And folks, I want to thank you for joining us as well, and I do hope that you have a Merry Christmas. And I will say this to you, I love you in the Lord, and I hope you'll continue to tune into Washington Watch, and also take the opportunity during this time of year to be open and bold about your faith. Just why you celebrate. Peter talks about be prepared to share for the hope that's within us. Well, as we're celebrating and we're joyful during this time of year, we need to be able to say why. We have deep, abiding joy because of Jesus Christ and what he's done for us. And that was God's gift to us. Until next time, I leave you with the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything that you can do, when you've prayed, when you've prepared, and when you have taken your stand, by all means, keep standing.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you've heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com. Also, to leave a comment about Washington Watch, call our watch line at 1-866-372-7234. That's 1-866-372-7234.